Welcome to Novel Ideas, Chats with Local Authors. I'm Josh Brogadir, and I'm here actually with my co-host, Carol Lynn, of course, and our special guest tonight is Amelia Ohop. Now, we're going to do this a little bit differently than we often do our episodes, because tonight we're going to be talking about the work that Carol did and working with Amelia, who's her illustrator. So, first of all, both, thank you very much for being here with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thanks, Josh.
Let's kick it off right away like we would before. Carol, this is your third novel. And I would have to say, in my personal opinion, you're most impressive to date, and you can really see the work and the time that went into this. So congratulations to you.
Thank you. Well, this actually went through 10 revisions.
10?
It started out because of the incident of the day the chalkboard fell, which was a true story. And I was just going to do an anthology of fun teacher stories of what's the craziest thing that ever happened to you as a teacher. And there are so many out there. Well, then they kind of didn't seem to hang together very well, and it sort of needed a little bit more. And my second book, Gym Class Klutz, was about actually this kid who couldn't do anything right in gym class. And I thought, well, you know, there were so many fun antics of these kids. And I took a writing course from Erin Dion, who's also been on our show. And she specializes in middle grade and young adult type things. And so I did a whole lot of student antics in that story. And in fact, that book there, this is not the condensed paperback version of it, but it was called The Day the Chalkboard Fell. And the teacher actually went through this.
Okay.
But and then it sort of evolved from that into what it is today.
All right, so let's talk first of all about the title and how you decided upon that and how that really kind of opened things up for you in a different way. So it's called Magnolias Don't Bloom in September. I actually am just coming back from the Virginia area where magnolias are now starting to bloom here at the end of March, so we know this is true. How is this symbolic and what does this mean?
Well, I had given this copy to a teacher friend of mine who'd read it, and she said to me, "Oh, Carol, the only thing wrong in this book is that magnolias don't bloom in September." And the teacher had come home from her first day of school, and there was a blooming magnolia by her front door. She said, "They don't bloom in September." I thought, wait a minute, that's such a perfect title for this book, because these kids are total ragtag, out of control, the beginning of the book, and they don't want to learn, and the teacher's not quite sure what to do with them in a lot of cases. And so by the end of the book, they all kind of grow in and they really bloom. I mean, it was one of the most amazing things to watch these kids. A lot of this is autobiographical.
All right, and we're going to get more information about that shortly. But now that you have a title like Magnolias and not Chalkboard, you needed a magnolia, and that's where Amelia comes into this conversation.
Yes.
So Amelia, I'm thrilled to have you here. You're not very far from where you actually go to college. You go to Framingham State, just up the hill from us right here.
Yeah.
How did you and Carol get to know each other?
So I had an internship at the Alumni House, or AFTV, and I did their graphic design work, and I illustrated a greeting card, and then I actually illustrated a book called The Orange Little Pumpkin from having that internship and doing those greeting cards. And a fellow alum saw my art and was like, "Hey, illustrate a children's book." So I tried it, and I loved it. And then from that book,
I saw this at a reception at the Alumni House. And so when I saw the book, I thought, oh, I really need a good illustrator. And so I grabbed her and said, "Would you like to do my book? Here's what it's about."
Excellent.
And so I came over when you were there, and we sat down at the kitchen table in the Alumni House. Kitchen tables are some of my favorite places. And we started.
A lot of business gets done.
Yeah. Well, we started talking about what I had in mind, and I'd given her a few ideas. And then she said, "Well, let's back up a minute." And we went through on the website, on Amazon, all the books, and looking at book covers. And we both said, "I like that one, I like that one, I like that one." And so then she says to me, "What do you like about that?" And I said, maybe the contrast. And I said, "But I also like this one here, because look at the line. The line just draws you in." She says, "Okay, so we want," and she started with her little piece of scratch paper, sketching out the
Good old red
lines.
pen.
And she says, well, we don't want straight lines. Let's make them diagonal. And put the magnolia here and so on. And that's basically exactly what you followed.
Normally you
finish it.
switch it up a little, but first one we were like, yeah, no, that's pretty good. I like it.
It works. And the interesting thing too, and it wasn't until after I saw the first design on the cover that I realized it's black and white. And because this is all about integration in Mississippi and the black and white and the two not really meeting but meeting, it was pretty cool.
Right, clearly
Yeah.
quite a bit of separation in the book
Yeah.
that we will discuss shortly. Had you ever drawn a magnolia before?
Actually, no. I draw literally everything, and magnolias was not one of them. It's pretty cool.
So what goes into figuring out how to do the actual flower for somebody who is not so initiated in the art world, such as myself, and I suspect many of the people watching the show won't be?
So we actually, when we were sitting there, I was like, hold on, let me look up magnolias. And I was scrolling through, like, just Google images, trying to just get an idea. Because at first I was like, are they white? Like, what petals do they have? What leaves? And she was very focused on the leaves because they have distinct leaves, obviously.
Sure.
And so we found a few photos, and I would just screenshot like 2, 3, or 4, and then I would just make my own out of them. So just a lot of sketching and then re-sketching, and then when I get one I like, that's...
And then she sent it to me. And this is just a
A
printout.
screenshot, yeah.
Yeah.
But her actual, she kept this in her notebook.
Yeah, I draw on very big paper because you never know. Better than smaller. So
Magnolias are an interesting flower in that, as I said, I was just in Virginia, and you see them in full bloom, and you can go back 3 days later, and they're kind of gone. They're a very quick
Yeah.
bloom, and they're gorgeous when they're there. And then the lawn is littered with what looks like snow or a pale pink.
I traveled to
Yeah.
the Atlanta area in Alabama, and I've seen the trees. And I
Yes.
told you
Yes.
like recently, and I'm like, nothing's blooming though.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen them yet, but hopefully I'll see them in my travels. But
Terrific. All right. Carol, let's jump a little bit into some of the background that you have as not just an author, but what your life path has been. The second half
crazy.
of the show. Well, of course it's crazy. And the second half of the show, we'll dig much deeper into the actual novel itself, which is a novel, but obviously is based on a lot of your own experiences. So let's talk about you for a moment here. You grew up in Northern Virginia, but you didn't stay there very long, certainly not after your high school days. Take us through that a little
Well,
bit.
in high school, I loved math and science. I was one of these real geeky girls, I mean, nerd. And there were no colleges at the time that admitted girls that were good science schools. Virginia Polytech did not admit girls then.
Okay.
Neither did University of Virginia. Girls went to Radford College. So I started looking out of state, and Penn State and Purdue University had really good science programs, and their out-of-state tuitions were cheaper than any of the private schools. So I ended up at Purdue, and when I graduated there, I went to Cornell in upstate New York, and I was on a straight PhD program in microbiology, and I was just feeling like my whole life I'd done nothing but go to school, and I had to get out from these four walls. And I had a bunch of friends that actually 4 of the 5 joined the Peace Corps. And so this was what I wanted to do. And of course I was this teeny tiny thing, maybe 107 pounds at the time, and my parents refused to let me even apply to the Peace Corps. So I was sort of looking for other stuff and other opportunities. And then I found out that Vista, I thought, well, they might buy Vista if they won't buy the Peace Corps.
Okay.
But Vista ended up, by the time I found out about it, it was too late to apply until the next year. In the meantime, I had dropped out of the microbiology program and gone into science education. And so I was doing that while I was teaching in upstate New York, an absolutely wonderful junior high school. Except it was in an old building, and the bricks were literally crumbling on the outside of the building. And so nobody wanted to teach there because they kept saying they needed a new building. But I had a ball. So then I was there for a year and just decided I absolutely had to get out. And so I ended up in Mississippi, because the Vista program was closed. And I talked to this lady in Washington, D.C. on the phone, and I must have sounded like I was practically in tears when she told me I'd have to wait another year. And she said, well, we do have a whole list of schools that are still looking for teachers, that Vista couldn't fill these positions. I suppose I can send you that. So I went down. Long distance calls used to cost a lot of money then.
Right.
So I went down to the office and in the grad school, and I made phone calls until somebody finally said yes.
When you say they said yes, I have to just hold that thought for one moment, because we
Yeah.
know what job applications are like now, and especially for teachers.
Oh, things were
You could
so
just
much
call up a school
Well, they
and
were
say,
so
do you
desperate.
need help? And
They were
would
so
say,
desperate.
Come on in.
Well, they basically said, you know, send us your resume or whatever. I mean, it was.
Sure.
But you know, I sent a resume
Mail
and an
us your
application
resume.
by mail. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Exactly. And then they left a message in the grad office saying that they wanted me to come down. So,
Wow.
okay, I'm out of here.
Okay. So then you became a science teacher, and you said Meridian, Mississippi?
Yeah.
Is that what it was?
Yeah.
What grade level was it?
6th and 7th.
Okay. I imagine you didn't have too many resources at your disposal in terms of
Oh my
a
gosh.
science lab or anything else
Oh,
that kids have
absolutely
these days when they are
nothing.
middle school. I'm
Nothing,
sure
nothing.
that you had when you were in middle school. I had when I was in middle school.
Oh no! Oh, and we had these horrible, skinny little windows, so that you didn't have windowsills.
Wow.
And luckily, the teacher across the hall loved woodworking, and so he made me these neat shelves, and I grew plants in there, and we did all sorts of fun stuff. But I had to be creative
Yes.
because these kids would have done nothing all year.
How many years total were you in Mississippi?
I was in Mississippi for 2 years.
For 2 years.
Well, actually 3, but the 3rd year I worked in the hospital.
Okay. Yeah. We're going to have a whole lot more to talk about when we get back. Stay with us. This is Novel Ideas. After the break, we're going to come back and we're going to dig into Magnolias Don't Bloom in September. Thanks for watching. Welcome back to Novel Ideas. Here with my co-host and the author of the book, Magnolias Don't Bloom in September. And of course, with us is Amelia, her illustrator. Thanks again both for being here and talking about a terrific book. Carol, let's dig in a little bit into what you wrote about in this case. This is a novel,
Yes.
but there, as we've talked about with many authors who've been on these couches and on these chairs, there's a lot of truth in people's writing and a lot of autobiographical moments. And so I really have to press you on this a little bit.
Yeah.
How much of what I read here about the injustice in Mississippi in 1970, in terms of a very intimidating, aggressive vice principal who wanted to administer his brand of justice to a new Yankee teacher, and some students for the first year, white students and black students in the same class together in a junior high school. How much of this is the life that you lived in Mississippi?
Oh, a lot of it's true. A lot of the incidents are true. I had 160 students total that year. And the problem was the black kids and the white kids in the beginning of the school year they wouldn't get near each other. And there's one particular incident where 2 kids get into this big brawl in the stairwell, and there's a lead pipe and a chain involved and all this stuff, and the kids are trying to scramble out. And of course, being the science teacher, the quote-unquote science room was built by the stairway because they assumed it was going to be a man teacher. Mm-hmm. And so I had the classroom above the stairwell, and this little girl came up the stairs, and she had a cut above her eye, and it was pouring blood. And so when I went to clean up her forehead with the tissues, about 2 days later, one of my other white students comes up to me and says, "My mama say you're going to die." "What? What are you talking about?" "Well, you touched her blood. You're going to die." And it was like, are you serious? And, you know, I kind of did what I said in the book, but I used to come home with all of these crazy things, and I would curl up in my chair and write in my diary, and that's where a lot of these incidents came from.
So you dug some of these out of your diary.
Oh, yes.
As you were going through.
And also, I saved all at the end of the school year. I always had my students give me a report card or write me a letter.
Right.
And I saved all of those. And so some of those made it in the book.
You described from the beginning of the book absolute mayhem in your classroom. Now, if you don't know this, Carol and our connection is that I taught her daughter many years ago at Walsh Middle School here in Framingham. My very first moment as a middle school teacher was walking into a classroom which at the time had 36 students and was trimmed down significantly through. But yeah, I looked in this classroom and there were kids leaning up against the wall. We didn't even have that number of desks. Of course, we're talking about 20 years ago now, or not quite, but this is a different thing altogether. I mean, these kids just had no sense of authority. Was that really the case?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And well, the interesting thing was when I taught in New York, when I was in upstate New York, college town, really nice. And the kids all just respected the teacher. You didn't have to do anything. The cafeteria, we had one cafeteria monitor, and the teachers had the luxury of going to the teacher's lounge to eat their lunch. In Mississippi, we sat on this little stage up top, and we had these kids literally all over the place. I mean, throwing food and whatnot. And luckily, we had one tall man teacher who his nickname was Sonny.
Mac.
Yeah, he's Mac in the book.
Sure. Yeah.
And he was built like Paul Bunyan, and all he'd have to do is stand up, and the kids would all calm down.
Interesting.
And it was fun. He used to love to tease me all the time because one day I actually said to him, "Well, what would you do if you were in my shoes?" And he looked at me and he said, "I ain't never going to be in those shoes."
Perfect. But when you were down in Mississippi, I mean, here you are, this Yankee, as they're all calling you this. Did they know anyone from the North? Was this?
Oh, no.
This must have been a real shock because people were living with their families to save enough money. Teachers weren't making any money. And here you were, not just a person living on your own, a man, but you're now a single woman who's living in their southern town and teaching at their school. That must have been a shock to their system in addition to yours.
Oh, well, I was shocked at how few people had ever been outside of 100 miles or 60-mile radius.
Yeah.
I mean, the teachers had been to Hattiesburg
Right.
and Biloxi, and, most of the kids, if they were lucky, had gone to the zoo in Jackson. And, that was their life. They had to me, that was just so, how can you not have been some of these places?
Sure.
So it was a real eye-opener.
The central character, or one of the central characters in here, is Clancy. And he's the vice principal. And for anyone who's thinking about someone who is administering his own brand of justice, as I said before, that's the Clancy character. You said before he is somewhat similar to a vice principal that was at your school?
Well, the thing was that in order to integrate the schools, they took the old white elementary school and made it certain grades, and the old black elementary school certain grades, and the old black junior high became 6th grade. The old white junior high became 7th and 8th. And so the old black junior high kept the black principal.
Okay.
So the assistant principal from the old white high school got moved under him. And a lot of it was his own resentment of being where he was. And I think, and then for me to come down and do and say some of the things that I did, I was so brash, and he wanted, oh man. And he
So you were
used to
outspoken,
just
Carol? I'm shocked to hear
No,
that.
I wasn't.
You
I
were not.
wasn't. But
You were
he
compliant with
well,
his
I was generally,
direction?
well, I just avoided him at every cost.
Fair enough.
I mean, I would go out of staff meetings and I would hide behind 3 other teachers to get out the door to go past him. And there was actually one scene where he seemed to be lurking. I always felt like he was looking for me.
Yeah. Okay.
And even the secretary one day actually did make a comment. This was in my diary too. The secretary made a comment. I don't know what he's got against you. He's nice to everybody else.
So I was asking you about the injustice, but in some other
Yeah.
ways, that's a big theme through
Oh, there's
this
a lot.
novel.
There was a
Tell us a
lot.
little bit more about the Ivory character and this whole, because this ends up being a court case in here,
Yeah.
where really Kenda, your main character, Kenda, is fighting for her job, and not just that, but also potentially she might go to jail.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
Ivory is sort of a mix of a whole bunch of kids. I mean, he's a
Composite.
composite of a
Yeah,
whole bunch of
sure.
kids, because I couldn't have 160 characters in the book. But this kid said to me that the most powerful thing I'd ever heard about teaching, when he turned around and he looked at me and he says, "Ms. Lady, how do you expect me to care about your math if you don't care about me?" And it was like, hit me like a ton of bricks. Wait a minute, I'm teaching all wrong. I'm worrying about the math. And here are these kids, they don't have food to eat, they don't have, all of these other things behind them. Some of them were walking 6 miles to school. There were no buses.
right.
And they didn't have siblings to walk with because their siblings were all in different schools. And it was sort of like all of a sudden I had to come to my senses of where are these kids coming from and how can I reach them? And they, of course, didn't want to sit in their seats, so I invented all sorts of, when they marched around the classroom, I'll never forget the day the principal was standing in the hallway and my students are marching around the classroom, figuring out areas, and then one little kid says, "Hey, he's got bigger feet than me and he's got a higher number."
Right.
So then I said, "Well, that's a really good thing." And we went up to the board. Oh, the kids loved the chalkboard. That was my
Yes.
saving grace. That was one of their motivators. That and those chips and pork rinds. Ah!
Can you smell them right now, thinking about it? I love how smell is the strongest sense in some ways. You just brought up the chalkboard for a moment. So it was going to be called The Day the Chalkboard Fell. Can you tell us about this chalkboard incident?
Oh, well, I was the one that set myself up for this.
Yeah.
The kids went to the principal and said they wanted to have a Valentine party.
Yeah.
And so the principal brought it up at staff meeting. "Hey, everybody, you game for this? You want to do it? It's probably the last year, and then the kids will be too old for it."
Right.
So all the teachers with the more experienced teachers got the good teams of kids. So they all said, yeah, sure, let's do an assembly schedule, end of the day. And so then the principal says, "Well, what about Mac's team?" And where's it? Max says, "I don't know about that." And Bobby Jean just loved to butt heads with me. Whatever, if I said it was black, she'd say it was white. And I think
sure.
that all started when I mentioned evolution, but that's another story.
That's a story
So
for Inside the Story.
I stood up for the kids, and I said, "Oh, these kids would really love it, and it's a Friday, so they'll go home and they'll have extra food and whatever. I think that's a really good idea." So my team fought me at first, and then I kept standing up to them, which was sort of part of her evolution, too. And so we end up with this Valentine party, and the kids are doing charades on the chalkboard. And this one girl in the class wants the piece of chalk, and she leans on the chalkboard ledge, and the whole thing comes crashing down to the floor with the most horrific sound. And the kids all start screaming and running, or the kids that were sitting down doing quiet things jump up out of their seats, and there's total bedlam. And the principal said, "Do not dismiss your students until 3 o'clock. So I stood with my arms out by the door, in front of the door, until the kids gradually calmed down and headed back over to see what food was left and whatever. And then the teacher across the hall, Matt, comes, pokes his head in. We had these little skinny windows in the door. And he peeks in the door and he goes, "My God, they tore your chalkboard down."
Wow.
And so by the time I got down to the office, everybody was accosting me with all these questions about what happened and oh my gosh and whatever. And I said, "Don't worry, it's Friday afternoon. Nobody got hurt." I walked out the door.
That was it.
Avoiding Clancy, of course.
The Wrath of Clancy. How interesting. Wow. This is something that I love how it chronicles time. We are almost out of time, but I have one more question to ask you as we continue through. What was this like for you to go through this in terms of cathartic? Was it just a look back in your own life? Did you ever?
It was
Did
fun.
you shed any tears while you were writing this, or was it
Oh,
more?
well, I did when I pulled out the kids' notes to me.
Yeah. Tell us that.
That was when I looked at these notes, and it was like I could remember so many of these kids, and it's been 50 years.
Wow.
And it was like I could see these kids right there. And the other neat pieces in the story was I actually did live above a beauty shop, so I got all the town gossip.
Yeah.
And I actually did moonlight in a hospital lab. And I got I was in the back room with the glassware washer, who was the only black person in the lab. And some of the white people in the front of the lab resented her, one in particular. Oh, she used to give me a hard time. And I just, she left me a few nasty notes in the time I was there.
Before we run out of time, tell people where they can get this book.
This book will be available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and whatever, after April 17th is its actual launch date.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Carol, thank you. Amelia, thank you. Loved having both of you, and love
Yeah.
having this. And thanks to all our viewers for watching Novel Ideas. Have a great night.